What if I told you the world's most famous MMA league was one step away from being banned forever? It was violent, it was brutal, and somehow it was legal. No judges, no rounds, just 8 fighters, a cage called the Octagon, and a $50,000 prize for the last man standing. There was no rule book either, just Big John McCarthy trying to keep order.
Knock it off. John, that was way late. That's up to Art to disqualify him. Knock it off.
The opening fight of UFC 1 made one thing crystal clear.
It was this massive sumo wrestler, Taylor Tooley, going up against Jared Gordeau, stick figure. Taylor Tooley looks like he's just gonna sit on him and squash his head.
We wanted to make clear with that first fight, this is unlike anything you've ever seen before.
Let's go. Whoa. We're just missing teeth there.
And all of a sudden, this tooth goes flying over my head. And I went, what was that?
And he stops right there. Now watch. Bam, that's a right leg roundhouse kick right to the face. That's where the tooth came out.
Everyone was stunned by the suddenness and the violence of that bout.
You don't see people kick someone in the face. It just doesn't happen. And this was something that was allowed.
Taylor Tooley had this look on his face like he had no idea what had hit him.
This wasn't a sport, it was a spectacle of violence. There were sumo wrestlers, kickboxers, guys fresh off bar fights, even a boxer with one glove.
His legs right there, Royce's legs. He's after effort. That opponent can't get his legs off the ground. As soon as
I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I was sure Royce was going to get his head knocked off his body by that boxer.
I never heard of Royce. I never even heard of jiu-jitsu. I never imagined that I would be fighting a wrestler on the ground floor.
The stand-up fighters had no idea what to do on the ground. So it was almost like unfair. Of course, I'm not punch-proof. Can't get hit. Can't afford to get hit.
It's like this human boa constrictor, and nobody could figure him out.
He just bowed out.
At first, it looked ridiculous. Then the bell rang. Blood poured. Bones broke. The crowd gasped. This was no gimmick. It was real, raw combat with almost no restraint. But one man would change everything. Royce Gracie. In a night filled with giants and brawlers, this skinny Brazilian in a white gi looked wildly out of place. But he had a secret weapon, Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. One by one, Royce dismantled men twice his size with calm precision. Just pure technique beating brute strength. Royce Gracie became a legend in one night, and the UFC became a hit.
What are you gonna do with the money? We're gonna go to Disneyland. You going to Disneyland?
When you look back on this now, and you think, when you watch these old matches from like 1993, what does it feel like to see that?
Crazy.
But fans and fighters alike had no idea that the madness was only just beginning.
Is it difficult for you to be a referee to get in the middle of that and stop?
And these guys 400 pounds in here. That's a lot of person to try to get to move and stuff. They're getting bigger and stronger and meaner around here. It's going to be a awfully hard competition to enter and win.
As pay-per-view buys grew, so did the brutality. The UFC didn't just allow violence, it celebrated it. Fighters battled through one-night gauntlets, sometimes fighting 3 times in a single evening. And the crowd loved every second. Forget mascots, the early UFC had the just bleed guy. This was the UFC at its most unforgiving. It was seen less as a sport and more as a fight for survival. While the blood and violence drew massive attention, it wasn't always the kind the UFC had hoped for, but we'll get to that soon. Amid the carnage, a chiseled catch wrestler with a chip on his shoulder named Ken Shamrock arose.
I ain't afraid of that man across from me.
After a 57-second loss to Royce Gracie at UFC 1, he became obsessed with redemption, racking up wins, and zeroing in on the man who humiliated him.
Ken Shamrock thought it was going to be an easy win. He was in great shape, and when we saw him, you were like, my God, that Captain America, who knows, he's going to knock his head off.
That's what made Royce Gracie seem even more sublime, because on the one hand, you have this ultra-violent fight where a guy gets his tooth knocked out of his face, and then this little guy comes across, and within seconds, the bigger, stronger guy is quitting.
To watch that was just amazing, and I've been hooked ever since.
You also mentioned to me during the press conference you'd hope to meet him in the finals.
Yes.
Do you believe that you're the second best person here?
I'm the third best person here today.
The first super fight in UFC history took place at UFC 5 in 1995. Royce Gracie, the jiu-jitsu wizard, versus Ken Shamrock, the powerhouse seeking revenge. What followed was the longest fight in UFC history. Shamrock controlled from the top but couldn't finish, and both men collapsed in exhaustion as the bout ended in a draw.
I can't believe it. Some of these people, there's a lot of people clapping. There's a lot of people clapping.
It wasn't the explosive finish fans expected, but it created something bigger. The UFC's first great rivalry. Gracie versus Shamrock wasn't just a fight, it was a clash of styles, of egos, and of visions for what this brutal new sport could become. While Gracie and Shamrock fought with skill, fans demanded blood. What came next was raw, unfiltered violence from fighters who treated the cage like a barroom brawl. If the early UFC proved that technique could conquer size, the next era showed that fans didn't always care.
This is man to man, and man to man, it is my preparation. If I'm bad enough, if I prepare myself, I'm gonna win.
By UFC 6, the violence was no longer a side effect, it was the main attraction. Mismatches, mayhem, and pure aggression ruled the cage. This was the era of raw power. And no one embodied it better than David Tank Abbott.
My name's Tank Abbott. I'm going to be the most athletic person that's ever stepped into the octagon. That, coupled with my experience, will definitely make me the UFC 6 champ.
A 280-pound street brawler who looked like he had just left a biker bar, Tank didn't care about technique or belts. His style? Pit fighting. His training? Drinking beer and throwing punches in real fights. And it made him a star.
I just want to tickle his brain a little bit.
Tank Abbott wasn't just a fighter, he was a spectacle. Fans either loved him or hated him, but everyone wanted to see what he'd do next.
You're either a winner and you're confident, or you're a loser and you're cocky. Whatever you want to say about me, big deal. I know who I am, and you know who you are. I'm here and you're not.
For a sport desperate to survive, Tank was ratings gold. While Tank fed the bloodlust, another force was quietly dominating with an entirely different approach. Dan, the Beast Severn.
And I'm watching people get soccer kicked in the face. Teeth are flying out. And I'm like, these are not exactly skills I possess. I thought, kind of looks like wrestling to me.
Severn wasn't new to UFC fans. He had lost to Royce Gracie at UFC 4 in a legendary fight that lasted nearly 16 minutes before Gracie tapped him with a triangle choke. And after winning the UFC 5 tournament,
UFC 4, he came back as a beast. And he won the title. And now
he was submitted by Ken Shamrock.
Let's just put it like this, point blank. I know what I'm capable of doing. And I should have turned that man into a pile of kindling wood. Because of what I know now, I wish I would have known then. Because we wouldn't be having this conversation. I would not have these internal struggles that I'm having. A lot of people say, ooh, this or ooh, that. You don't have a clue. You're not in my world. You don't know nothing about me.
Later that year, Severn returned with a vengeance.
Michigan. Here we go. These two are going to wind up in tight. Really in tight. Let's see if Severn can control the wrestling. He does right away.
I'm really impressed with
He taps out. The polar bear taps out, and the beast loves it.
A decorated Greco-Roman wrestler, Severn treated opponents like rag dolls, suplexing men over his head and grinding them into the mat with relentless pressure.
The announcement.
Severn won UFC 5 and Ultimate 1995 tournaments, then captured the super fight title at UFC 9 by grinding out Ken Shamrock in a bout that bored fans but proved his dominance.
Severn, the winner.
Dan Severn wins
Dan Severn.
the super fight by decision.
Dan Severn's a class act. He's a badass guy. He was a monumental, absolute legend in mixed martial arts. The guy's got over 100 victories, fighting into his 50s. It's just absolutely insane that he could do that.
The era was defined by two extremes: Tank Abbott's barroom brawling and Severn's wrestling smother. One delivered the bloodlust fans wanted. The other proved that raw strength and discipline still mattered in the Wild West of MMA. We want the fans to sound off their thoughts. Who is the real face of the UFC in this era? Tank, Severn, or someone else entirely? Comment below. The UFC was exploding in popularity, but so was the outrage. With blood-soaked brawls and no rules in sight, the sport wasn't just gaining fans, it was gaining enemies. And those enemies had power. The peer specialists weren't as common. Now came a new breed, tough, versatile, and impossible to break. And leading the charge?
Those who know him call him the Predator.
When I step into the octagon, my opponent will become my prey.
He fought like a gunslinger and wore a mustache that could have headlined its own pay-per-view. Don, the Predator Fry.
So it'll be interesting. Oh, good takedown by Don Fry. That was quick. Pounding at the head quickly of Atkins.
I'm Don Fry, the returning Ultimate Fighting Champion. I'm not here to prove my skills. I know what I can do. I'm not here to say hi to anybody. I am not at rest. I am not at peace. I have a real bad attitude. And when I go into the octagon, lock up your women and children, because all hell is going to break loose.
Don could do it all: wrestle, knock you out, submit you, and brawl like no other. At UFC 8, he won 3 fights in one night, including an 8-second KO. After that, Fry became a legend, walking through punches, dragging guys into clinches, and pounding them out. No flash, no trash talk, just pure grit. Every time the cage door shut, Fry brought hell with him, and the fans loved him for it.
Don, in your wildest dreams, do you think as a David you would walk through this tournament, become king of UFC 8?
I knew that I was going to win this tournament. I had a feeling that I'd be facing a Goliath in each round, and that came true.
Fighters like Fry gave fans the hope that the sport could evolve without losing its soul. He was tough, he was technical, but the sport was changing fast, and the monsters were coming. Before we go on, if you're into stories about the wild early days of MMA, hit subscribe. Trust me, what's coming next is even crazier. As the UFC inched towards legitimacy, one thing was clear: raw power was still king. Nobody embodied that more than Mark the Hammer Coleman.
Who was the most powerful fighter you were ever in there against?
Oh, geez. Gotta be Mark Coleman without question. You know, Coleman's just a freaking animal. Just an animal.
Coleman introduced a weapon that would forever change MMA: ground and pound. Coleman wasn't just winning, he was mauling his opponents. Coleman changed the game, smashing opponents with brutal ground strikes, winning UFC 10 and 11 before claiming the first heavyweight title by choking out Dan Severn.
And
In those early days, Coleman didn't just prove wrestling worked, he showed it could dominate in the cage and redefine the sport itself. But then came a fighter who made Coleman look almost ordinary, Mark Kerr. Debuting at UFC 14, Kerr looked like something out of a comic book. 6 foot 3 inches, 255 pounds of shredded muscle with the athleticism to match. His takedowns hit like car crashes. His finishes, sudden, brutal, and absolute. Kerr didn't just beat opponents, he broke them.
And he was just a giant of a man.
He is.
Show Mark Kerr in his prime. I mean, his trap started at the top of his ears.
I know, he was an animal.
Kerr looked unstoppable, tearing through tournaments and earning a reputation as MMA's most terrifying man. But behind the dominance came addiction and a tumultuous personal life, turning his story into one of sport's darkest cautionary tales.
One of the harder parts for me to adjust to life now is that I've lived the life I've lived. That I've fought in front of 60, 70,000 people. Well, I've won world championships. I've been paid, hundreds of $1,000s to do it. And now I just live a regular life. Sometimes that's hard. Monthly, I don't have adrenaline juicing through my veins. I don't have that level of excitement in my life. So sometimes I think maybe the boredom gets to me, the mundaneness of what I'm doing day in and day out. So, that might be a contributor to it as well.
Just when the sport seemed ruled by raw power, a new kind of fighter surfaced. One who would change everything. Frank Shamrock. When most fighters still clung to one style, Frank Shamrock was different. He trained like MMA was a sport, cross-training in every discipline, managing energy, and fighting with strategy, not just toughness.
My name is Frank Shamrock, world champion fighter, martial artist, warrior. My goal was to be the greatest fighter in the world.
When you look at the pantheon of the greatest mixed martial artists, you should begin with Frank Shamrock.
He was the best fighter at his weight class. There was no one that was better.
5-time UFC champion. He was one of the first guys who really had the whole package.
The greatest mixed martial artist of the 90s. He was the best fighter of the decade.
Trying to get Coleman to move. You shift position.
Frank is a fighter. Technical. Different species.
He was ahead of his time. In my opinion, he was the first complete fighter in MMA.
He could wrestle, he could submit you, and he could strike with you. No one had really done that before in the way that Frank Shamrock had.
Everybody else was a kickboxer, they were a wrestler, the jiu-jitsu guy. He was the guy who went out and did everything.
I love Frank like a brother. I mean, he's one of my favorite people in the world. He was a good role model for a lot of these kids coming up from the street.
Frank is a pioneer. Frank's somebody who has been laying down the runway for guys like me to take off.
When you look at Frank Shamrock and know where he's come from and what he has had to overcome, martial arts saved his life.
In 1997, he armbarred Olympic gold medalist Kevin Jackson in 16 seconds to become the UFC's first light heavyweight champ. 4 title defenses followed, capped by a legendary win over Tito Ortiz. In an era of specialists, Shamrock was the blueprint, the first complete fighter. Then came a fight that symbolized MMA's next evolution. Randy Couture versus Vitor Belfort. Vitor was the future of the sport, or so it seemed. At just 19, the Phenom was a lightning-fast knockout artist with blinding hand speed and vicious combinations. People thought pure explosiveness would continue to rule the new UFC. When he was matched up with Randy Couture, a 34-year-old former Olympic Greco-Roman wrestler who was much slower and less spectacular by comparison, fans were certain that Couture would be dominated. But boy, were they wrong. While a stunning upset at the time, this wasn't a fluke. it proved something crucial. MMA wasn't about being the fastest or strongest anymore. It was about strategy, adaptability, and experience. That upset marked the birth of the cerebral fighter and the beginning of the end for one-dimensional dominance. But as Shamrock and Couture were redefining the game inside the cage, forces outside it were trying to kill the sport altogether. By the late 90s, the UFC was in trouble. Branded human cockfighting by Senator John McCain, it was pulled from cable. Pay-per-view collapsed, crowds thinned, and the UFC bled money.
What is Senator McCain's argument? How did his letters to 50 governors get this outlawed?
Senator McCain, referred to it as human cockfighting, which might be the worst syntax I've ever heard. It's fighting, it's not human cockfighting. And what happened is, if there's one thing politicians like more than grandstanding about morality, it's spending revenue.
For a moment, it looked finished. But even in the turmoil, a new kind of fighter emerged. His name? Bas Rutten. A Dutch kickboxing champion turned submission expert.
Savage. Yeah, and one of the most, one of the original technical strikers.
Bas was the first true kickboxing specialist to develop a full skill set in UFC history, paving the way for fighters like Israel Adesanya and Alex Pereira. After a heated rivalry with Frank Shamrock, he entered the octagon and made his mark. The UFC saw Bas as their savior. He had everything: elite skill, charisma, and knockout power. After winning his debut, Bas earned a title shot, and at UFC 20, he claimed the heavyweight crown in a controversial decision over Kevin Randleman. Despite the dubious judging, it didn't matter for the UFC. They finally had the man who could lead them out of the darkness. But the dream didn't last. Injuries forced Bas to vacate the belt, and he never fought in the UFC again. The golden hope was gone, and even a superstar couldn't stop what came next: near total collapse.
Ultimate fighting, mixed martial arts. I think at one point you talked about it being even banned.
The first look that I had at martial arts fighting, there was people knocking them other down, sitting on top of them and smashing them in the face. There was no referee, there was nothing. It was terrible.
Do you think the rules are okay?
No.
The wild brawls had made the UFC a pay-per-view sensation, but it also painted a target on the sport's back. States began banning events. Some cable companies refused to air them. Politicians were speaking out publicly against the sport.
What it was at the beginning was human cockfighting. It was. I've seen people repeatedly getting smashed in the face with a guy sitting on top of them. That's not a sport. That's a throwback to the Roman Colosseum.
If the UFC didn't change, it would die. What began as a no-rules blood sport was now adopting structure, adding safety measures, restrictions, and the framework of legitimacy. The Wild West culture was fading, and for the first time, the UFC was starting to look like a real sport. While the rulebook was evolving, so were the fighters. By the year 2000, the UFC was on life support. Pay-per-view revenue had dried up, states refused to sanction events, Senator John McCain's crusade had worked. MMA was nearly banned everywhere. Then came the turning point. In January 2001, Station Casino executives Lorenzo and Frank Fertitta, along with Dana White, bought the UFC for $2 million and formed Zuffa LLC. Their mission? Save the sport by legitimizing it.
What was the state of the sport when you were, or the state of the UFC when you were interested in purchasing it?
It was going out of business. It was basically going out of business. This guy, I don't know if he had the money or didn't, but
was not willing to fund it anymore. It was at the end of its rope. It was going out of business.
That meant rules, and lots of them. Gloves became mandatory. Weight classes were standardized. Time limits, rounds, judges, and the 10-point must system were fully implemented. Headbutts, soccer kicks, and strikes to the back of the head were outlawed. For the first time, MMA had real structure. The biggest breakthrough came in April 2001 when the New Jersey State Athletic Control Board adopted the unified rules of mixed martial arts. These rules spelled out everything, including scoring criteria, fouls, round lengths, and fighter attire. Later that year, Nevada followed suit, officially sanctioning the UFC. For the first time, the sport was legal in the fight capital of the world, Las Vegas. This was a massive step forward. The no-holds-barred spectacle that once thrived on unabridged violence was now a regulated sport. The Wild West was dead, and with it, the last hope of seeing a 600-pound sumo wrestler shoot a double leg. The foundation for modern MMA was in place. But the UFC wasn't out of the woods yet. The Fertittas had rules on their side, but they were about to find out that building an audience would be the fight of their lives. Legitimacy didn't guarantee survival. Pay-per-view buys tanked, fans disappeared, and the company continued to bleed money. There were rules in place, but the real fight was just beginning. They needed a miracle. But that is a story for another time. The early insanity may have shaped the UFC, but the next story will blow your mind. We're talking about a fighter who did the impossible with one arm. That's coming soon, so hit subscribe and don't miss it.